At the middle of Lamed Bet Amud Aleph, so actually a little ahead. Let's take a look. Ein Pochsin. So we had before the issue about breaking into a storage shed that had fruit in it, or if the shed broke open, and the word there was used pochet, v'nifchat. That there was a breach, or somehow there was a break in the wall. So here, seemingly the connection, besides obviously that this is obviously connected because it's questions about Yantav, but since so much until now has been about getting food and similar issues out of storage, here we switch gears a little, but it seems that the transition word is this word ein pochsin, which is to like break. So ein pochsin etzatner, or to like make a hole in the lamp, mitneshu osa kli, because you're making a vessel. Now, what exactly are you doing? So Rashi says what you're doing is you're taking a lump of clay, and you're basically like pushing your fist into a lump of clay, and you're making something that can be used as a lamp, right? You now have a basic place to have a receptacle for the oil. So Rashi says that's what it's talking about, like making a hole, not making a hole all the way through, but punching not a crevice,
indentation.
Indentation. Thank you. Depression. Thank you, Dov. You came at the right time. For in the lump of clay. Now, Tosha says, that is like patently obvious. Of course, what are you talking about? You can't, obviously, it's not making vessels on Yontav, taking clay and making it into vessels. Also, the Gemara thinks that our Mishnah is not necessarily, as we'll see in a minute, agreed on by everyone. And Tosha says, how could anybody disagree that you're forbidden to take a lump of clay and fashion it into a vessel? So Tosha says what we're talking about here is that when they would make a vessel of clay or whatever it would be, and they would put it in the urn in order to fire it, the kiln actually, not the urn, the kiln, in order to fire it, that they would have some stuffing on the inside in the cavity of the vessel, so that the walls would stay straight and wouldn't like collapse in while it was being fired, and that they would put it in for a little while with this stuffing, get it to begin hardening, then they would take out this stuffing, whatever it would be, like stuffed up newspapers or whatever, or sticks or whatever. So then they would take it out and then they put it back in to finish the firing. So it says that's what's referring to the word pochsin. Pochsin again is like to make a hole into it. So what it means is it was fired up the first stage, like before Yantav, and now you're going to remove the stuffing, and now it's ready to be fired the second stage. So is the removing of that stuffing, at this stage, the walls have begun to harden, so it's theoretically usable at this stage. It's not done, but it's theoretically usable, and your removing of the stuffing could be seen as you've now made it functional, right? You could look at it two ways. No, you just got the stuffing out so you can finish firing it up. It's still nothing. It's still not a vessel. Or you could say, no, now that you remove the stuffing, the walls are a little bit hard, it's theoretically usable. So that's how Tosfos reads this case, and we'll follow Tosfos. Okay, so the Mishnah says you can't do that, that would be too much like making it a vessel. The ein osim pchamim b'yontav, you cannot make coals on Yontav. Now, obviously, you can make a fire and incidentally have coals, that's a lot of what you do on Yontav, not a new fire, we'll talk about that, but you can't intentionally make things that are going to, make the fire and extinguish it and do it in a way so that you have these nice, intense, hot coals to use, for some other use. That's like making a thing, right? That's in a way, it's almost like a vessel. You took wood, you fired it, you burned it, you have a nice hot coal, you have charcoal. So you cannot intentionally make charcoal. An incidental result of the fire, but you cannot make charcoal on Yontav. And we'll see in the Gemara what you would use that for, because a normal fire, a normal cooking, you'd use a fire. You wouldn't want specifically charcoal. 1 minute. And what you could also not do is you cannot cut a wick. You basically have a wick that you're using into your lamp, and you want to basically cut it down to the right size, or maybe you want to cut off the charred part at the end. So you cannot cut a wick to use it. Rabbi Yehuda says you can put a long wick over fire and have the fire, essentially cut it in half by breaking it in half. That you're allowed to do, but you cannot use, let's say, a knife or scissors. Now, what's the difference? Either way, you're making a wick. We will see. But this Mishnah, what combines all these cases is that these are all things which is essentially like making a vessel, tikkun kli, which could be like, a doraisa of makeh bepatish, whether what exact degree of making something is considered makeh bepatish. If it's like Tosos, it's removing just sticks from within a vessel that's not itself complete. Is that a real biblical makeh bepatish? Is cutting a wick that was functional anyway, but now you're cutting it down to size, although also there could be other problems about mechatech and so on. Anyway, but here are types of things which could be like real malachas, and they're not directly, clearly involved in the making of food. You have two of them that are about lamps, and they're not about the making of food, and therefore these are clearly going to be forbidden. Some of this can even be biblical. It is worth pointing out that Rabbi Yehuda here, although he gives an allowance using a fire, and we'll see why in the Gemara, he doesn't really debate the principle. And you might remember that Rabbi Yehuda was the one who said that you can do machshirei ochel nefesh, that you can do preparatory things for the making of food, and you can sharpen knives, for example. So the fact that here the principle agrees is important for the position, for the general consensus that Rabbi Yehuda would, while he allows you to do preparatory things, he does not allow you to create vessels from scratch. And we discussed that when we did Rabbi Yehuda, because that would not be in the immediate context of making the food, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda does not disagree in principle with what is going on in this Mishnah. Dov, you had a comment.
Just, I'm sorry if you said this already before I came in the Rashi, what's he talking about Beitzim shel yotzei?
Yeah, that's that means like a blob of clay. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so let's take a look at the Gemara. So the Gemara says, Mantana b'chisa sneir manahu. Who says that once you make this hole in the lamp, it's already a vessel? Now again, we're going to read it like Tosos, not like Rashi, that it's the first indentation in the blob of clay. Because the Gemara here is saying that maybe not everybody agrees it's a problem. And according to Tosos, how would anybody think it's not a problem on Yom Tov to actually begin to fashion a vessel out of a lump of clay? The other reason that Tosos says Rashi is wrong is because we're going to see, or doesn't agree with Rashi's read, we're going to see that the Gemara is going to introduce discussions of when this type of vessel can be mekabel tumah, is susceptible for becoming tameh, which normally is a definition of being a vessel, and that might be applicable in other realms as well, from the realm of tumah. The only thing is that when you're dealing with something made out of clay, even if it's completely functional, it is not mekabel tumah as long as it remains clay. It only becomes mekabel tumah after it becomes pottery, after it becomes fired in a kiln. So therefore, another reason why Tosa says Rashi does not like Rashi's interpretation, because we're going to talk about it being susceptible for tumah, and according to Rashi, the thing hasn't been fired in a kiln yet. So again, we are going to talk like Tosfos, and the assumption is the removing of the stuffing in a middle stage of it being fired. Who says that at that stage it's already a vessel? Because that's why the Mishnah says it's a problem. If you remove the stuffing, it's like you made it a vessel. Well, who would call that a vessel at that stage? But it's already been fired to some degree. So let's take a look. So Amar of Yosef, Rabbi Meir. It's Rabbi Meir. Titania Vitana Beitzah. Klei cheres me'enasai mikabel tumah. Pottery vessels. When are they susceptible for impurity? When are they defined as a vessel? Mishenigmara melachta. Divrei Rabbi Meir. When the work is done, which is what Rabbi Meir says. It sounds like it's pretty much begging the question, right? That's what we want to know. When is the work done? But let's take a look. Rabbi Yoshua Omer Misheyitzrefu b'kivshan. Once it's only fired up in the kiln. So what does Rabbi Meir say? So Tosa says that's the point. Rabbi Meir says once you're done with the work you're doing, and what's the last work you have to do is remove the stuffing, then it's a vessel. The rest is like sort of gets done by itself. It finishes being fired, but the work you're doing is done. Whereas Rabbi Yoshua says, no, you need to have it be fired the second time, even after you've removed the stuffing. It's not yet a vessel until it finishes the process of being fired in the kiln. So that's the way Tosas reads this through his interpretation, and therefore the Gemara says, so you see, according to Rabbi Meir, it's already a vessel and becomes defined as a vessel once you remove the stuffing, and therefore that's why the Mishnah has it as a problem. So Amalei Abaye, so Abaye said back, Mimai, who says you can compare these cases? Meaning, what type of vessel are you talking about? Maybe you're talking about like a large jar, So even before the walls have been fully fired, there's got to be another word for that. Anyway, hardened, in the kiln, it's still usable for something. You got a large jar, you can put fruit in it or something. Aval hacha, but here, lemay chazi. What good is it? Now, why is there a difference? How does he assume it's different? Because he says, look, a lamp, if you ever saw one of those small little, pottery lamps, it's got a tiny little indentation, right? The only thing logically you could use it for is for oil, is for a lamp. Well, there's a little bit of a difference between putting fruit in a pottery vessel that has not finished hardening and putting oil in a pottery vessel that has not finished hardening.
Fired. It hasn't been completely fired.
No, but they're both the same vessel, but one is a big one and you're storing apples in it, and the other is a small one and you're storing oil in it.
Before the final fire.
Before the final firing. So what's the difference?
So the one that's not been fired completely can still be used.
No, the opposite. The one that's not fired completely for oil, though.
Right.
Why can it not be used for oil?
Because
it absorbs the oil.
Absorbed.
Right. You can't use it. You can use it for fruit. If it's big, okay, we haven't finished firing it. We can still use it for something. But if it's a tiny little lamp thing, maybe everybody should agree it's not done until you finish firing. What are you going to use it for at this stage? You can't put oil in it. So that's what the Gemara says. So the Gemara says, no. Chazi l'kibulei pshiti. You can still use it for taking, little types of objects into it, right? And therefore, it is even at that stage, it is fit. Okay. So the Gemara says, and therefore it wants to say that this is tied into this debate of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, of Rabbi Yoshua, because this is still usable even at this stage. Okay, so now the Gemara goes on. Some say Amar Rav Yosef, Rabbi Linzer, Rabbi Tzadok. Not to tie to the debate of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yoshua, which seems pretty direct. We're going to tie it to the debate of Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Tzadok, and the rabbis. Now we're talking Mishnah. Ilfasina charaniyot. So you have, let's say, a pot. An ilfas is like a pot or frying pan. That's a charaniyot, which we'll see means basically it's like from the villages. It's used in the in the villages. And we'll see that means. It's not as complete as you would have it if you were used for the city folk. But this is used by the village folk. So it's a village frying pan. Tahorot, but olamate. They are tahor in if they're in the same under the same roof of a dead body, which may open masah hazav, and they're tamei if a zav carries it. Now, what's the difference? Are they a kli or not a kli? So Tosfos basically describes. Oh, we don't have a marker. Tosfos basically describes that the way they're made is. I guess I'll use this. I don't know if this is going to help or not, but anyway. All right. Anyway, here's my frying pan. Okay, you got your handle, you got your pan. But he says what you have is you've got at the top of it some type of a like molding or some type of a thing that eventually is going to be removed. But while it is, but at this stage, it still has a cover on the top of it. Okay, some type of a cover that's molded onto the top of it, which is in some interim stage of it's being made. It's important to have that cover there. Again, maybe the way it's heated up and fired. But eventually, you're going to remove the cover and you'll have your pan. What's the story while it still has the cover on? So Tosfos says, well, here's the story. In an olam mate, there's a principle of what's the story of a pottery vessel that is tightly covered. Anybody know this? It's in the Torah. It says, "Asher ein samit patil alav."
Right.
That if you have a pottery vessel that does not have a tight cover on it, it is impure. But because pottery vessels become impure through their inside, even if it's under the roof of a dead body, if it has a cover and it's a tight cover, and here you have a cover that's essentially molded on, it's tahor. However, if a zav moves it, it's tameh. Because since a zav is moving it, he's also he's not just moving the outside, he's also moving the inside. And when a zav moves something, it is considered to be as if he touched the inside. So even though it's got a cover, if a zav carries it, it's tameh, but if it's in an olamate, it's tahor. So the key is, though, that it is a type of a frying pan which has a cover that has not yet been removed. So there's some similarity to this idea that it is like partly finished, but it doesn't have a piece of it hasn't been removed yet. The same way by the case of the other vessel, the stuffing hasn't been removed. So that's the case here.
The question in some ways is at what juncture does something enter into the gader of kli?
Right, exactly. So the Gemara and Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Tzadok Omer, af tahorot b'masal zav. Even if a zav carries it or moves it, it's tahor. Lefi shelo. What happened here? Lefi. I forget. I'm going to forget this. Wonderful. Lefi shelo nigmara melachtan, because the melacha isn't done. So again, I think I forgot to turn this on. We're continuing here on Lamed Bet Amud Aleph about 10 lines from the bottom. Okay, so we have the Mishnah that says that you cannot be pochet the nair, which Tosfos says means you cannot remove the stuffing after the first firing of this lamp. It hasn't finished hardening, because that would be like making it a vessel. And we want to say, who is the Tana that says that removing something before it's sort of finished being hardened is still considered a vessel? So first we compared it to a general statement about pottery vessels, which Tosfos understood again. We're talking exactly about this, that once the stuffing is removed before the second firing. And now we are talking about these frying pans, where the Tanakama says that even while they have the cover on, they're still a vessel. So they're a vessel at an earlier stage, even with the cover on, and we'll see why. How can you use a frying pan when it still has the cover is sealed on and not removed? But Rabbi Eliezer Beitzah says no. He says, Lefi shelo nigmar melachtam, their work isn't done, which again is understood to mean the top hasn't been removed. But once the top is removed, presumably again, even if you have not yet finished hardening it and firing it, it would be a vessel. So for Rabbi Eliezer Beitzah, the removing of this obstruction makes it a vessel even before presumably the firing and the hardening process has completed. Okay, so now the Gemara says, same question. Amalei Abai, so Abai said back, Dilma, maybe not true. Dilma, Adkan lo kama Rabbi Eliezer Beitzah Hossa, maybe Rabbi Eliezer Beitzah only said it there. Because once you've removed the cover of a frying pan, even if it hasn't finished hardening, you can still use it for storing things and for putting things in it. Here, this tiny little lamp, which is not finished and hardened, you can't put oil in it. What good is it going to do? It has no purpose. It says yes, you can put little objects into it, and therefore you can use it. So the Gemara again is saying that our Mishnah says you cannot remove the stuffing or this obstruction that's part of the process of making a vessel, and the act of removing it even before it's hardened is like making it into a vessel. And the Gemara compares it to two different Tanaim in different debates by Tuman Tahara, by when is a vessel susceptible to, is this a vessel at the stage when this is removed before it has finished being hardened. Okay, let's just finish up this issue about these village frying pans. So the Gemara says, Tana Rabbanan, ein pochsin asaner ve'ein osin ilfasin charaniyot b'yom tov. So here, interestingly, we have a Beitzah that combines this second discussion of Tuman Tahara in our Yontif discussion. So the same way you cannot remove the filling from the lamp before it's finished even before it's finished hardening, you cannot also make these frying pans, these village frying pans, which again presumably would mean that you can't remove the cover the way Tosfos is understanding it. Okay, so the Gemara says Rabbi Shimon Gamliel matya be'ilfin charaniyot, and Rabbi Shimon Gamliel allows it. So again, maybe exactly this same type of a question of it, whether they are considered, at what stage are they considered to be finished or a vessel or not. So the Gemara says, my charaniyot, and what does this mean? We've been talking about these charaniyot vessels. What does that mean? So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Yehuda iraniyot, village frying pans. My iraniyot, what does that mean? So Amar Abai tzai chaklaisa. Okay, that means basically plates that are used, out in the fields. Because basically, what do you do with a frying pan that still has the cover on it? Well, what you do with a frying pan that still has the cover on it is that you could still use it as a platter until you've got the cover removed. So therefore, that's why these are called these village frying pans. It's true, they still have the cover sealed on and it hasn't been removed, but they might out in the villages where they're not so fancy, they might be prepared to use them at that stage. They could use them as a type of a platter. Yes, Dov, you had a question.
Would you say, is it accurate, in your opinion, to say that the machloket here is whether the definition is functional or formalistic, right? It can either receive things or not, it's useful or not.
Right.
It's about whether I don't care whether it's useful or not, it's not done. The cover is still on. In some ways, there's two different modes of thought going on behind, intertwined.
You mean one is just saying, right, even though it has a function, it is in an objective sense, it has not really finished being processed. Right. Yeah, that's true. That is true. Yes. Okay, yeah. 1 minute. Fine. So now let's go on. So the Gemara says like this. Okay, but we'll just do that. Okay, so we're now done with the issue about making a vessel. So again, obviously you can't, like Tosa says to Rashi, nobody would think you could start molding clay. But the question is at a certain middle stage and removing something, and how much have you really made it a vessel? How much have you finished it? How much was it not a vessel beforehand? That's sort of what's being debated here. And again, the interesting point is that Rabbi Yehuda is part of this discussion in the Mishnah, even though he says you could do machshiri ochel nefesh, which is again a demonstration that Rabbi Yehuda could agree that if it's an issue of actually making a vessel, that makes it in a different category. Okay, now the Gemara says like this: the eino sim pchamim. You cannot make charcoal. Pita, obvious. Lemai chazi, what are you going to use it for? Now, that's a funny question. What do you mean, lemai chazi? Who cares what you're going to use it for? You can't make it because, what is not being able to be used for something, make it obvious why you can't do it. So it's going to seem from the Gemara's answer that the point is like this. Look, you can make a fire on Yontiv. So, again, not a new fire. So maybe if you were using this charcoal for cooking, maybe you would be able to. Maybe you could. What would be so bad? Right? It's like making a fire. But the Gemara is saying, yeah, but you don't use charcoal for cooking. So you don't use charcoal for cooking. What do you use it for? So, I guess they didn't have we have these grills where the whole point is to keep it as a charcoal level and so on. So basically you would use it primarily for, Rashi says, for smelting, metals and in metalwork. So if that's true, the Gemara says, so of course you can't make it. There's no ochel nefesh value here. What would be the havamina? So let's see what the Gemara's answer is. So the Gemara says, Tani Rabbi Chia lo nitzucha el lamosam u'yarin libo biyom. No, maybe you wanted to use it for something you thought was a legitimate use. You were going to give it over to the bathhouse workers and the people that heat up the water in the bathhouse. Okay, and therefore you might think, okay, well, you're allowed to have hot water, you're allowed to heat up water for bathing on Yontiv, right? So that is ochel nefesh. So that should be allowed.
Simcha, no?
Yeah, but besides simcha, you're not allowed stam simcha yontiv. It has to be in the ochel nefesh category. Okay, so you're allowed to heat up water for bathing. That's considered something on the body, and it's a tzarech kol guf, etc. So therefore, maybe you could also be able to make the charcoal that's used in these bathhouses. So the Gemara says, 1 minute, says the Gemara. Since when can you go into a heated water bathhouse, even on Yontiv? Because why not? Because there actually is a halacha, and this is important even nowadays, which is that Chazal did not let people go into a bathhouse on Shabbos, even if the water was heated before Shabbos. Why not? Because once you start letting people use the bathhouses with preheated water, they're going to come to use the bathhouses with water that's heated on Shabbos. Fine. That makes sense on Shabbos. But how about Yontiv? On Yontiv, if you would heat the water on Yontiv, it wouldn't be a big deal. Now, maybe it would. We've discussed before that maybe, at least in the time of the Gemara, that heating water for your face and legs or whatever, that would be a normal type of use, but water for your whole body maybe wouldn't be considered as universal of use. But anyway, however you understand it, the Gemara makes it clear that this Gzeirat Merchatza'ot applied not only on Shabbos, but even on Yontiv, even though on Yontiv it might even be permissible to heat the water under some circumstances, but nevertheless, the bathhouses were totally off limits even on Yontiv. So if that's true, now I'll tell you why that's relevant in a minute, but if that's true, says the Gemara, what do you mean? Well, I could have heated the charcoal for bathhouses. Bathhouses are off limits on Yontiv, right? Even if the heating water is tzorech kol guf, the bathhouse use is off limits. So what would you have used it for? So the Gemara says, no, Amar Rava lehazia, to schwitz, which is, even when they forbade initially the bathhouses, they did not forbid initially the sauna part of the bathhouses. So to use steam, again, it's funny because you would think, if anything, you're more likely to do a malacha on the day itself. It would be the creating of the steam, not the heating of and the retaining of the water. But they also had ways to keep the steam in a room below and plugged up, and then you would release it. Anyway, we'll see about that more later. But basically, initially, the point was that they did not forbid you to use a prumi that was not heated in violation. They did not forbid you to use the steam house. So here, at that stage, when the steam was not yet forbidden, you want to heat up charcoal and use it for your sauna on Yontiv. It's a tzorech kol guf, and it's not forbidden rabbinically, and that's what you want to do. And the Mishnah says, even if that's a legitimate use, you cannot go be making charcoal on Yantiv. So the Gemara says, V'kodem gzeira, before they forbade the steam, before the gzeira about using the sauna. So Hachanami, so he says that in a different context. So here also, Lahaziyah V'kodem gzeira, where we'd be talking about that a context that you wanted to use it for a sauna before the gzeira, so it was a legitimate use, and nevertheless you can't do it. Now again, this is important, because this underscores, I don't know if that's a word, underscores again the point that even if it's Tzorach Kol Haguf, even if it's a type of an ochel nefesh, which like hot water and so on for the body is generally considered, you cannot make a vessel for that purpose. And even Rabbi Yehuda, who allows machshivei ochel nefesh, because Rabbi Yehuda is in the Mishnah, seems to not debate this point, that he will not let you make charcoal, even if it is for the purpose of something that is a tzorech, that is a tzorech ochel nefesh. So again, for us, I think it's a little funny to think of charcoal as a kli, but why not? It's like something, you took a piece of wood, you fashioned it in a certain way, you used fire to fashion it in a certain way, and now it's usable to do something with. So
is not the necessary.
Well, right, we don't always use the what do you call it, the Tumantara criteria. So you can make a fire, but if you're actually making the kli for the fire, right? Like according to Rabbi Yehuda, last machshivei ochel nefesh, would he let me dig out a fireplace? Would he let me make a grill on Yontiv? So this is the issue. So here too, you can't make the charcoal. Okay, and therefore that is considered, even if making it something that's like a kli and has this greater sense of long-term and permanence and so on, that is going to be a problem even according to Rabbi Yehuda, and that's the problem here, even if you found a legitimate use, like to use it for steam or to use it on your grill. Now, the other thing I want to say, and again, we'll see this when we also get to the Gzeres Merchatzot. Actually, we might have done that already in Shabbos. We might not be singing it now. But anyway, this is very relevant for the issue of taking a hot shower on Yontif. Because according to the Gemara, Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai, you might remember that Beit Hillel lets you heat up hot water for using for Panav Yadav Raglav, but not for Kol Gufo. Right? Now, why not? So Tosfos says, well, hot water for your whole body, that's not a universal need. Face and hands and arms, yes, but not everybody really needs it. So not fancy that they need to bathe their whole body in hot water. So according to that, many poskim say that nowadays, where obviously it is a very universal need, and for many people on a daily basis, I think sometimes there's differences in certain countries whether how much they see daily bathing, but nevertheless, that it would totally be a tzorach kol haguf, and that you could take a hot shower on Yontif, and there's no problem, even if normally, assuming we won't get into that whole discussion about if you live in an apartment building and can you use the hot water, whatever. We generally assume you can't use the hot water, whether for whatever the reason is. Let's say it's a case of a house. So the use of the hot water will always lead to other water being. Okay, I'm going on a digression. Anyway, assuming that you're not generally using hot water on Shabbos you can take a shower on Yontiv because that's a tzorach kol haguf. Now, not everybody agrees, but many poskim do say that. However, even though you can take a hot shower on Yontiv because it's again, you cooking or fire related, but it's all about something that's a universal bodily need. So it's like ochel nefesh. You can't take a hot bath, because a hot bath remains in the Gzeres Merchatzot. So that remains rabbinically forbidden based on this whole issue of the bathhouses, even if you're still allowed to take a hot shower. Yes, Charlie.
But people are immersing mikvah even on Shabbat.
Yes, okay. So there's a lot of poskim that try to figure out why, and but we'll bracket that for that.
This is the same issue as in the main madlikim is the making of the tilot, whether it turns into a clear.
That's related. There, it's more about havara, about kiboy being like a constructive type of an act, the malacha shetzricha legufa, but it's related. The idea certainly that charcoal or whatever is considered to be something that's being made. Okay, so now
wouldn't using the steam lead somebody to want to take a bath?
Yes, so that's a good question, and I think even beyond that is as I said, although not necessarily, you see a lot of people that go and they just want to sit in the sauna and they're not interested in that. But I think the bigger question is isn't steam even a bigger concern that you'll come to violate Shabbos or Yontiv in the making of the steam? But for now, we're just going to bracket that. It's a good question.
What is a clay then? I thought it was like a vessel. Kli.
Kli, it is. But that's what I'm saying. So how do you define what a vessel is? Meaning, why isn't something that's used in why is charcoal not a vessel? I think the only reason we think that it's not a vessel is because we think of a vessel as something that that endures. No, not that holds.
No.
I think the reason, if I ask me, is charcoal a vessel? It's not that vessel. You use it up.
Oh.
Right? But, so it gets destroyed in the process. But, like, what I consider to be, I don't know, a wrapping paper, like, or some type of, like, disposable
Ziploc bag.
thing, a vessel. But I think I would say yes, but a Ziploc bag gets reused. But let's say it's something that's completely one-time disposable
Paper
use.
plate.
Right. Do I consider it a vessel? I don't know. I think I do. And I think I do somehow more than I do a charcoal. Maybe because charcoal, the way you use it is by destroying it. But it's an interesting question. You're right. In some intuitive sense, I don't think we think of charcoal as a vessel, and the Gemara is. I actually heard an interesting thing the other day, which is about how do we think about categories. This goes back to that whole idea of like this Platonic ideal that like they've done studies, and if you ask people like, is this thing a fruit? Most people won't think like of abstract criteria of what makes a fruit. They'll think about their paradigm fruit. For most people, it's an apple, and they'll ask themselves, is this like an apple enough or not? So that's how like we sort of think about, does it fit into a category? We think about the thing for us that represents the category. Say, oh, is this close enough to that? So anyway, all right. Some reason for us charcoal doesn't fit into the Kli category. I agree with you. Okay, so now the Gemara continues. So you cannot cut a wick into two. That's also like making it a vessel. By the way, that's interesting also because, you could say, well, I didn't add functionality, right? Before it was usable, now it's usable. It's just now it's a better size to use and it's not as wasteful or whatever. Now I don't know, again, maybe you do have functionality. Maybe if you have too long of a wick in a lamp, maybe the oil is drawn at a different rate or something. But, this gets to the question of like cutting toilet paper and cutting paper towels and cutting tin foil. Well, what do you mean I made it a vessel? I could have used it before. I'm just cutting it to size. So besides that, there could also be an issue of machatech, which is cutting something to size, but that might mean a precise size. Here you do see that when you cut it and you create it in its more functional use, its more appropriate sized use, that there is that concern. Again, is it biblical? Is it rabbinic? But certainly there's that concern. There's that issue. So you cannot cut the wick into two. But Rabbi Yehuda says you can use the fire to cut it into two. So the Gemara says, "Ma'ishna besakin delo." Why can you not use a knife to come metakin mana? Because you're fixing a vessel. Now there is a debate in Rishonim when the Gemara uses the phrase metakin mana. Does it mean it's a biblical violation of makeh b'chatish, of making a vessel, or is it a rabbinic violation because it's close to the idea of making a vessel? But either way, it's forbidden. So the Gemara says, so if that's true, but or nami kametakin mana. So according to that, why does Rabbi Yehuda let you use the fire? You're also making it a vessel. Who cares whether you use a scissors or a knife or a fire? So Tani Rabbi Chia, so Rabbi Chia turned to Beitzah, which will help explain Rabbi Yehuda's position. What you can do is it can incidentally make it a vessel. What you do is you take these two types of, you got your two lamps here. I see I needed either either a marker or better manipulable. Anyway, you got your two lamps, and you've got now I need a string. You've got your wick that goes between the two lamps like this. So where are you going to light the lamps? Is it going to be the wick that's coming out here, or are you going to light it in the middle, and then you're going to have the two lamps pointing like this? So what you do is, if by lighting it here in the middle, you're basically lighting the lamp. You're not doing an act of creating two wicks. It happens to be that's conveniently making it into two lamps. Now that works better. If that works better, if the whole problem is rabbinic. And if you look at Rashi, Rashi says, Rashi says, no saint shnei Moshe b'toch, anyway, just 3 lines down, third line in Rashi, Delo muchacha deletikune mana mechave. It doesn't make it obvious that you're trying to make it a vessel. And look about it, it looks like you're just lighting the lamp. So it's all very nice what it looks like, but if you really are trying to make two wicks, Who cares? Who are you fooling? God?
Yeah.
But again, if the problem is rabbinic, that it's similar to making a vessel, and in this case, experientially, it's not that's the focus, the sort of immediate experience is lighting of the wicks. Therefore, that reframes it and makes it permissible. Okay, so now the Gemara says like this. Amarav Nasan bar Abba Amarav Mochtin esaptila b'yom tov. You can needle, like the word machat, the wick on Yom Tov. My mochtin, what does it mean you can needle? We actually have that as a verb in English too, to needle somebody. So Amarav Chanina, but this more literally means using a needle. Amarav Chanina bar Shamaya la'aduye chashocha, to remove the blackness, which means you take like a sharp object and you like scrape it against the edge of the wick. It's a pre-used wick, right? So you want to get off some of the charcoal or whatever and maybe straighten out the threads. That you can do. That's interesting, right? Why don't you say that's also like making a vessel? It's somewhat analogous to sharpening knives, right? You cannot go ahead and make a new knife and a knife that's not usable, but you can sharpen a dull knife. Remember, we had that before, especially according to Rabbi Yehuda. So here too, you can like fix it up a little bit. You're not making it new. That you're allowed to do. Okay, Tani Bar Kapara Torah. Vav dvarim nemu, shisha dvarim nemu v'ptila. 6 things were said about a wick. Gimel lahachmir v'gimel lahakel. 3 stringent rulings and 3 lenient rulings. Lahachmir, here are the stringent rulings. Ein goldin oto lechatchila b'yantav. You can't like actually like braid a wick on yantav. That's really like making something, taking strands and twisting it into a wick. The ein mahavhin oto be'ur. You cannot like char it in the light,
That's
meaning
a lesson of the
yeah, right. Because that's what makes something easy to light, is that it's been pre-charred at the top. That would also be like making it a vessel. The aim chotchinoto l'shnayim, and you can't cut it into 2. All these things are like making it a vessel. Okay, lahakel, 3 things that are lenient. Mema'acha biyad. You can like sort of smush it. That's a technical term. Anyway, in your hand, which basically also somehow makes it more like flattens it. Makes it more able to absorb the oil. But that's a much more informal type of a thing. And if you look at Rashi says tikun kilachar yadu. You're not doing it. Not only would I say kilachar yadu, which suggests like a shinoi, maybe that's part of it. It's also not like there's no like craftsman aspect to it. There's no precision to that process. Maybe it's also that it wasn't so unfunctional without that. Okay, again, it's interesting to know what exactly are the lines of distinction, and if you think that the whole problem here is d'Rabbanan, that it's not really making the vessel, well, I don't know, maybe twisting the strings is the making of it from scratch. But if these other things are not really, and it's sort of more of a rabbinic issue, you can understand that some of these at an experiential level are different and would not be considered problematic.
You don't need expertise in
Right.
smishing.
The shora b'shemen, you can immerse it in oil, like you have a pre-oiled wick, right? So, you want your wick to be pre-absorbed oil. But again, that's not like making it. That's maybe the beginning of using it, I would also say, anyway. But they do sometimes sell, don't they sometimes sell wicks that are like pre-oiled or whatever?
Yeah.
And I know that some people sell pans that covered wax, certainly. But people also sell pans that are like pre-seasoned, right? That have been pre-absorbed oil. Okay, V'chotcha be'ur, and here paskening like Rabbi Yehuda, you can use a fire to divide the wick if you're doing it by running it between 2 lamps. Amarav Nazar bar Abba Amarav. So Nazar bar Abba said the name of Atire Bavel, the rich of Bavel, the rich people of Bavel, Yorde Gehenim are going down into Gehenim. Why? Kiha. Now, the Shabsai bar Marinos, Shabsai the son of Marimos, equal to Bavel, he's not the rich guy, we'll see what happened. Apparently it means that there were a lot of wealthy people in Bavel, and we'll see that they did not act properly. It's not just talking about a few individuals, maybe about a culture. Okay? So he dropped into Bavel, and he wanted to see if he could do some business with some of the people there. Wanted to invest with them, wanted to maybe do some little buying and selling with them. They were not interested. Here he was, a poor guy, and they didn't want to give him a helping hand. They didn't want to help make him give him a job. They completely were not interested. He wasn't asking for a handout. Doesn't matter. They didn't feel any need to help him. Mizone. So then he was sort of reduced to asking for like a handout. He wanted just for some food. He was starving. They wouldn't even give him food. Amar. So he said, Hani me Erev Rav Ka'asu. these people, they're not real Jews. They must have come from the Erev Rav, from the from the masses, from those what do they call what's
riff-raff.
the riff-raff, right? The mixed multitude that were not they're not real Jews. Why? Because the verse says, "V'nasan lecha rachamim v'richamcha." So this is the pasuk that it says actually after you'll destroy the Yernidachas, it says God will give you compassion and He'll have compassion on you. And the end of the pasuk is Kasher nishba la'avotecha, and He'll do good to you like He swore to your fathers. So it means, are you real descendants of your fathers? That will be determined if v'natan lecha rachamim, if it's demonstrated that God has given you compassion, which means that you're able to demonstrate compassion to others. By the way, that's an important read of the pasuk, because normally you read the pasuk, God will give you compassion means He'll have compassion on you. V'richamcha. Now the Gemara is reading it, and a number of the Mefarshei Mikra read it, is no. The point is, because by the way, this pasuk appears after you've wiped out the Yonidachas, and they read it what it says, v'natan lecha rachamim, you've done this tremendous, cruel act that you're commanded to do, but it was a cruel act. God will now give you back the capacity of compassion. So He will give, not He will have compassion on you, but He'll give you the capacity of compassion. So this is how the Gemara is reading it, and that's Kasher nishba la'avotecha. So how do we know that you are descendant of your forefathers? By demonstrating that you have compassion. Anybody that has compassion on the creatures, you know that he is of the descendants of Avraham. If you are not able to have compassion, he is not of those descendants, and therefore that's why we say the rich people of Bavel are going to Gehenna, because apparently they were Jews, but there was a real culture of not giving and not caring about those that were in greater need. The only reason, by the way, we're mentioning this is that it was the same Amorav that spoke about the using of the needle for the wick. It's Rabbi Nassim bar Abba, if you were wondering what this is doing here. Okay, now the Gemara continues. Rav Nassim bar Abba Marav, so the same Rav Nassim bar Abba says the name of Rav. If you're always looking at what somebody else has, you're looking at the other person's table, the whole world will look dark to you, right? You'll never be happy with anything. Everything will look bleak because you're never having enough as somebody, as much as this other person has. Shenemar, as the verse says, Nodeid hu lalachem, he is wandering for bread. Ayo, where will he find bread? Yedak hinachon biyado, you should know that ready in your hand is Yom Choshech, is a day of darkness. So if you're always looking for bread, meaning presumably even if you have bread, you're looking for bread, you're never happy, you're always looking who has something better, then the whole world will look dark and bleak. His life isn't even like a real life. Again, it's not exactly clear what he added to the previous statement. It's a different metaphor than saying, your whole life is dark, you're bleak. Anyway, you don't enjoy life. You have no sense of really living. You're always wondering about what you could have and what you don't have. Okay, Tana Rabbanan, now that we said that allows for a transition to one final agadic statement. Gimel chayim einam chayim. Three people, their lives aren't real lives. They're not really living. The Eluhain, these are they. Hamatzapa l'shulchan chaver, what we just said. They're always looking towards and longing for what your friend's table, what somebody else has and that you don't have. So you're never actually enjoying what you do have and living in the moment. Umi she'ishto moshelet alav. So a man whose wife has dominion over him. So there's the Gemara again speaking from the male perspective. Where's Rivka at this time? Umi sheyisurin moshlim gufo, and somebody that his body is racked with suffering, with affliction. Clearly, that person is not, is very hard. They're so taken up by the pain, that it's very difficult for that person to actually feel like they're living their life. And some say, it's fascinating. You always have to love the way the Gemara has these anticlimactic ends sometimes to this thing. Go from very drastic. I don't know if the Moshe, whatever the case of the husband and wife was drastic, but anyway, two of them were. To this case about somebody who only has one shirt. Why? Because that shirt will get filled with it'll get dirty and sweaty and filled with lice in particular, and therefore he'll wind up living a miserable existence. So the Gemara says, the first opinion that didn't mention this is, you could delouse your shirt even if you only have one shirt, so you might not be able to take it off for a long period to wash it, but maybe you could delouse it while you're wearing it. Again, very funny anticlimactic end to that. Okay, now we get on to the next Mishnah. Ein shovin et acheres, we're continuing with this idea of making vessels on Yantav, even in the context of food and food-related activities. You cannot break a piece of pottery, so you're going to break a pottery to use it as like a scooper or a back scratcher, or you'll use it to cook fish on it, like you'll put it on top of the fire and it'll help distribute the fire, so you can't do that. You're really like turning it into a vessel. The ein chotkin haniyar, and you can't break a paper. Litzlot bo maliach, in order to roast a fish on it. So this would be like cutting a piece of parchment paper on yontif to use it, or a piece of tin foil, aluminum foil.
It would be papyrus in that.
What?
It would be
papyrus. Yeah, it would not be like wood-based paper. Right. The ein gorfin tart. So again, you can't make vessels even in the context of ochel nefesh. The ein gorfin a tanur v'kirayim, and you cannot sweep out an oven. Now, why not again sweep out an oven? Big deal. You're just removing ashes. So Rashi, we had this once before, and Rashi again speaks about it that some part of like the plaster or something sort of fell down, and it's really in a somewhat ruined stage. And what you'll be doing is you'll be actually fixing it in some way. Aval mechabshin. But what you can do is that you can pat down the ashes to make it usable in that way. Okay, where were we? Right. Rashi also says that if the ashes or whatever are too much, they'll get stuck to the food that you're cooking and it'll ruin the food. So you can pat them against the floor and against the walls and make it usable that way, but you cannot really scrape it or plaster it and fix it in a significant way. Okay. What you also cannot do is take two big barrels and you're going to make an ad hoc oven. What you'll do is you'll take here. You'll take these two big barrels and you'll put them next to each other, these two big wine barrels, and you're going to make a fire between them, and you'll put your pot suspended by the top of the barrels, okay? Because that's making it like an ad hoc oven that you cannot do. Now, that's very funny because all you did is you moved two barrels next to each other. You didn't physically change them. So we'll see what that's about in the Gemara. The ein somchin es hakdera b'pikat. You cannot support a pot with with like a beam, okay, or like a bolt of wood. The chen b'delet, and also by a door, which is not clear what it means, but it sounds like it means that you can't use like a detached door to support a pot, okay, on the fire. So we'll have to see what that's about. The ein manhigin es habehema b'makel. So now we're moving from making vessels to other things. You cannot lead an animal with a stick b'yom tov. Okay. Now, is that a problem about muktzah? Is it about the stick? Is it about an uvd d'chol? Okay. What exactly is the problem? The ein Rabbi Linzer, Rabbi Shimon Matir, Rabbi Linzer, Rabbi Shimon allow. So the last couple things related specifically to wood issues, and Rashi says this Mishnah seems to be working with the assumption that wood, by definition, can only be used for fire. It's not considered a kli, even if you wanted to use it for something else, and it can only be used for fire. Okay, but we will talk, and that's why you can't use it to support a pot and to lead an animal, but we'll talk about that in the Gemara. Let's start now at least with Gemara. My timer, says the Gemara. What's the reason that you cannot break the pottery or the papyrus to use in cooking? Mishum de kamatake mana, again, because you are making a vessel, and even in the context of ochel nefesh, that is still forbidden. The ein gorfin tana v'kirayim, you cannot sweep out the oven, again, in some way that you're fixing it. Tani Mebichia bar Yosef coming to Rav Nachman, but if you can't bake unless you actually sweep it out, because otherwise the ashes will stick, to the bread or whatever, mutar, then it is permissible. Again, not exactly clear why the sweeping out was exactly a problem altogether, but also the fact that we give this type of an allowance also reflects, to some degree that even though the Gemara says metakein maneh, it might not be talking about a biblical issue of tikkun kli. These things do seem like smaller, don't seem like necessarily what a real making of a vessel would be. Again, some Rishonim say it is biblical, but some say it is only rabbinic.
This points to the halakhic ambiguity of this entire category. It's usher to do the grifa, but you have to.
Right. Well, again, they only say that by the grifa. They don't say that by other things. Right. And we should admit that the sweeping out of the oven of all these things is a thing that seems the least like you're making something. You're just sweeping the ashes out. So Rashi tries to explain why it's a problem by making it a little bit worse, by saying like some of the plaster fell down, it's a little broken. But the fact that the Gemara, this is the one thing the Gemara says if you don't have a choice, it's allowed, seems to indicate that whatever it wasn't so bad. But I wouldn't necessarily assume that you could apply that to the other categories. Yes.
Something is missing from this discussion, something we had earlier in the sector, which is the issue that you could have done most of these things before Yom Tov.
So Efshel Asosa Mibod Yom is not a concern really by things that are directly Ochel Nefesh. It is a concern about Machshivei Ochel Nefesh, and you are right that these are Machshivei Ochel Nefesh, even according to Reb Yehuda. But not necessarily some of them may be, but some of them, like the oven or whatnot, might have become problematic on Yom Tov itself. But you do raise a good point that maybe according to Reb Yehuda, some of these things have the additional problem of Machshivei, even if Machshivei Ochel Nefesh, okay, the additional problem of Efshel Asos Mibod Yom. Okay, that is possible, but the Gemara does not seem, you're right, the Gemara seems to feel it's problematic even regardless of that. All right, let's read a little bit more. So this is where Rashi is getting this idea. Rabbi Chia's wife, a brick fell down into the oven. Maybe a brick from the oven fell into it, and that sort of like ruined it. It wasn't just natural ashes and dirty. Okay, that sort of would be like the scenario Rashi is talking about, not sweeping out the oven. Biyom Tova. There you go, Charlie. You're addressing your issue. It didn't happen before. It happened on Yom Tov. Amar Rabbi Chia said to her, and this is like we had this line before, Chazi dana rifta mal yisaba'ina. He saw that she was about to be machmir, and he said, pay attention. I want to eat some nice, good bread on Yom Tov. So basically, he said, this is EF shar. There's no way to do it without sweeping it out. So this would be a case where you're allowed to sweep it out. Now, so therefore, this idea of EF shar is, again, it gives you an allowance, but only in the Gemara, in this case of sweeping out the oven. Okay. Now the Gemara says like this. Okay. Amalei Rabbi L'Shmaye. Rabbi said to his attendant, Tavi li bar avza, roast for me a goose, I think, or a duck. Yeah. I keep getting them confused. A goose. Roast for me a goose. Be careful that it doesn't touch the charcoal, which will ruin it. Again, that's why you want to sweep things out or pat them down. It touches the charcoal, it blackens it, it ruins it. Okay? So, not exactly clear. Is that telling us a halacha? Is he telling us that therefore he's allowed to sweep it out? Or is he, what? But clearly it's talking to us about what the issues are. Okay? So let's take a look. One minute, just a Rashi. Right. Okay. One more line. Amalei Ravina Ravashi. Amalan Rav. So Ravina said to Ravashi. Amalan Rav Acha Mihutza. Rav Acha from Hutzel said to us, Demar, that the master Sharkinle, meaning you. He said to Ravashi, we heard that you Sharkinle Tanura Biyom Tova, that you seal up your oven with on Yom Tov, meaning what they would do is they put something in an oven and then they would completely seal the door with like a plaster to, in order to create this, the appropriate type of a hot heat contact. So how can you smear this type of a plaster around the door of the oven? Isn't that basically like lush when you make the plaster, like kneading and so on? How is that allowed? Is that really true that you do that? So he says to him, where are we? Amalei, he said back to him, no. I rely on the banks of the Euphrates, which means is I get mud from the Euphrates. I don't make plaster. I just get pre-made mud from the Euphrates, so it's not a problem. But how's the mud not muktzah? So it's only if you designated the mud before Yom Tov. You made like a little indentation. I'm going to take from this mud, and you made a little mark on it, and then it's not muktzah, and then it's not a problem of plastering or whatever because it's already pre-made mud. And Amar Ravina v'kit mashar, to use ashes would be okay. Rashi says ashes with water. Tosh says no, that's also lisha. And Tosh says it's just to take ashes and stuff the ashes in the crevices to seal up the oven door. That also would be a way of doing it. Okay.